What is up, Ravens Flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome everyone to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with my co-host James Haskell. In this episode, we're going to discuss some more of Eric DeCosta's recent comments in his end-of-the-year presser, this time surrounding the highest paid player on the team. Well, I guess maybe not for 1 year, but certainly the biggest contract on the team and one of the most important pieces. But before we get into all that, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and we will keep you up to date on all your Ravens news. But Jimbo, let the people know why we are here.
Yeah, we're here because we're going to talk about Ronnie Stanley, the former All-Pro left tackle for the Baltimore Ravens, and really the conundrum that is Ronnie Stanley right now. Mm-hmm. Not only is he extremely well paid, he is extremely unavailable at this point. Ronnie Stanley, of course, had the severe ankle injury and then re-injured it and only played, if I'm not mistaken, Glenn, he just played week 1, right? Last year.
Week 1, and it was tough to watch.
Yeah, it wasn't a great showing, and then ended up getting surgery again to hopefully finally repair this ankle properly and get Ronnie back to full form. But the reason we're talking about Ronnie Stanley is not solely the injury, but it is, and that's a big part of it. We're also talking about Eric DeCosta admitting, like you said, Glenn, in his year-end presser that he did not properly prepare for the possibility of Ronnie not coming back healthy. He assumed that Ronnie would be back healthy. And didn't really have a solid plan.
Called it a mistake.
Yeah, he called it a mistake, but he did say, I don't want to say I assumed, but there's really no other word. He assumed that Ronnie was going to be back. So now with this offseason being in the same exact scenario that he was last offseason, essentially, how will he react differently? So how will he prepare in case Ronnie Stanley is not back? So that's what we're here to talk about. How we think he will do so, and what we think they should do. So let's start there, Glenn. What are the ways that are within Eric DeCosta's ability to prepare for the idea of Ronnie Stanley not coming back?
Yeah, so there's really there's 4 total ways you can do this. That's from within, so guys returning from injury, young guys progressing, stuff like that. There is, of course, free agency where you could pay a veteran who's already established himself and bring him in. The draft, which is the big one, at least for the Ravens. And then, of course, trade routes are always available, but not likely at that position because everyone seemingly has a need at somewhere on the offensive line, but tackle is certainly the biggest of all the offensive line positions. And so a trade is less likely as far as a guy you can actually count on. Maybe a depth move is trade, but if you got a guy that you believe in, you typically aren't willing to move him because it's such a premier position. But just looking at what the Ravens currently have, they could decide if Alejandro wants to come back and give it another year, they could decide to keep him.
As an insurance policy, guys.
Exactly.
Don't have a panic attack.
Yeah, hey, I'm just letting you know what I'm not telling you what I want them to do.
Right.
I'm just letting you know their options. Tyree Phillips, of course, they spoke very highly of him. And if he can, they said, if he can somehow remain healthy, he's got a good football in him. But he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And honestly, yeah, I guess we'll give our opinions a little bit later, but that's not one I'm necessarily thrilled about. But that's it as far as inside.
Pat McCary?
Yeah, I guess so. You can count Pat McCary. They did sign him to an extension, but I think that, I guess he's an insurance policy. If Ronnie were to go down mid-season, you could put McCary in there,
I like
but he's
better
certainly
than those other options you gave me, though.
Yeah, I guess so. But man, I think McCary is great as your 6th guy, but not a guy you want to start either way. So those are your guys in-house, and as Jimmy just said, don't feel really good about any of them. And just look at last year; those guys were here last year, outside of when Tyree was hurt, and it was a disaster at left tackle. So, not feeling good about that. But
There
What
are some
about
other
free
ways.
agency, Jimbo?
Yeah, exactly. So you talked about that, and then one other way they can address it is free agency. And so there are some names out there on the market if the Ravens decide that the situation is urgent enough
Mm-hmm.
for them to spend money on the scenario or on the situation, excuse me, and what type of player they want to get, right? So just to give you some names, now these guys range from full-on starters to maybe more swing guys. But you're talking Taron Armstead. Of course, we know him down from I was about to say St. Louis, New Orleans, excuse me. One Orlando Brown Jr. Glenn, can you just show us the jersey you got real quick of your favorite player? Oh, let's check this out. This is Glenn Martin's favorite football player.
This is not my favorite football player. I did lose a bet, however, and that's why I'm treating it so recklessly.
I
And just
know you're not
balling
even
it up in the
extending.
corner. Nope. This is who you think it is, and I'm giving it its just due here.
There you go. We'll have a bonfire someday, and we'll give it its rightful. We'll do what's right. Dwayne Brown, of course, Eric Fisher, Morgan Moses, Trent Brown. That's an intriguing one. Riley Reef, Jermaine Ifedi, Brandon Shell, Bobby Massey. So those are some names that are on the market.
Mm-hmm.
All of them will fetch contracts, like you said, Glenn. Left tackles or tackles in general in high demand. So that's another way the Ravens can address it. So you talked about internally, we talked about free agency, and of course the draft, which we'll get into some names as we dig through the draft as soon as the Super Bowl is over. But that's another possibility as well there. What I really want to talk about now is, now that we know the ways they can address it, what do we see happening? What do we want to happen? So I'll start with you, Glenn. What do you see happening? How do you see the Ravens addressing this issue?
Yeah, so every year it seems like the Ravens come out and basically publicly announce that they're going to attack one position or another in an effort to fix that position. So we saw it, after the Ravens were ousted by the Tennessee Titans, them talking about the run defense, that they wanted to fix that and make that a priority. Well, they the very following year they held Derrick Henry to, I think, 22 yards in a playoff game. So check that off the list. Then the next year it was, we got to get some more weapons offensively. We got to address the wide receiver position. Well, I think now if you ask most Ravens fans, they feel pretty good about the young core with Hollywood Brown, Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, and then of course Mark Andrews over the middle, who just got his big extension. So seemingly they checked that box. And also, just to double down on that point, they drafted more receivers in the last 3 years than any team in the league. So they seemingly checked that box. Well, this year, they from John to Eric DeCosta, they both said they need to build a fortress around Lamar Jackson, and they need to address and have a commanding, it was the word that I think Eric DeCosta used. They want to have a commanding offensive line. So there's no doubt that they're going to attack this offensive line unit as a whole. And maybe the biggest piece of that is the left tackle. And it's interesting because they chose to pay Ronnie Stanley and allow Orlando Brown to whine his way out of town and force a trade because when Orlando saw Ronnie get all that money, he knew that he wasn't going to be the left tackle of the future here because of the financial investment. So they chose to pay Ronnie Stanley. Now, I think if you could turn back time, or if you give some truth serum to these guys, I think they'd say, man, we may have messed up a little bit giving Ronnie Stanley this monster contract just to see him sitting on the trainer table. So they're going to address it. But to what degree can you address it, Jimbo? Because it's such a conundrum. You can't just simply take Evan Neal out of Alabama with your first round pick, the 6'7" tackle, and say, all right, we're good. We're putting him in there. Because you don't want your number one pick sitting on the bench if Ronnie is healthy. Because, of course, if Ronnie is healthy, then he's going to start because he's a monster and he's he's really talented and he's really highly paid. So, but then do you want to wait and then take a late round pick on a guy who's more of a project
and then maybe he doesn't turn out?
And exactly, end up with a guy who doesn't turn out, or do you go after free agency? And then you spend you can't, right? You really can't go after a free agent because you can't pay two tackles.
Not a guy
to do one job.
Right. Not a guy that's truly a starter you want to have out there.
Right. Unless you see like super value in a guy who's undervalued by everyone else.
Maybe
so you
like a
get him great
Morgan
deal.
Moses because he's an older guy. You know what I mean? You
But
get
he's
him
played almost exclusively at the right side. So
Yeah.
it's like how, now
It's
you're
like
asking him to come play left
Alejandro,
for you.
yeah, it's kind of the opposite. I mean, maybe you draft it. So, and then that's the other thing. If you attack it in the draft, because we have a relatively high first round pick for the Ravens, do you get a guy that is a natural left and then say, hey, we're going to play you at like Orlando, right? He played left.
I'm getting
at Oklahoma.
deja vu, Jimbo.
Right.
Are we going to get another baby crying his way out of town?
It could be possible, right? It could be possible, or
Ugh.
it could line up with Ronnie. With relatively speaking, it could be close to Ronnie's. The end of Ronnie and the emergence of this guy. And moving over to left tackle. So that could be the way they do it as well. But even so, the problem then becomes the right tackle position because you're taking a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
Who, just like you talked about Morgan Moses, and you're saying, hey, just like Alejandro Villanueva has said, it's asking someone to like start playing baseball with their opposite hand, right?
Yeah.
So now you're saying, hey, go play right tackle. Now we saw Orlando do it. Maybe the Ravens can do it with another guy. I just want to say something off the jump.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of tired of Eric DeCosta putting so much emphasis on the draft. It's always if we can nail the draft. It's always if we can line up the combination. Like, I want to do other things other than just nail the draft. Like, I can't keep hoping that we're going to nail it and then be Super Bowl champs. I'm not asking to be the Rams, but like,
but what else can you do to build your team?
I mean, yeah,
you have
you're
to.
right.
I think that fans are most frustrated about the willingness, or the lack of willingness to move up to go get a guy that is the guy.
Because Eric is obsessed with the idea of value at every pick. He talked about it again in this drive. He's so fixated on it that sometimes it's like this, Glenn. You buy a house because you know it's gonna appreciate. It's gonna be a good investment. Like blah, blah, like people tell you all these things, but at the end of the day, you buy the house to live in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is something you're gonna live in for the majority of your time while you own that house. That's where you're gonna be. Forget the value. If you like the home, you buy the home. Right? I think Eric needs to get out from the numbers and the value and the equations and the this and the that and say, we like this guy. He's a Raven. We're going to get him. Right? Like, I don't care about the other stuff, what round we're in, whatever. I'm not saying take a 6th round guy in the 1st round, but point being, I think that sometimes it's just about knowing who you like. So I just opened up a can of worms. What I'm trying to say is that I think it will eventually be the draft. That we do it, and they'll try and copy this whole thing we did with Orlando Brown and maybe get a guy that won't whine himself out of town, right? And I think they get a guy in free agency that maybe we're not thinking of right now.
Well, Juwan James is still there at right tackle because let's be honest, this video is about the left tackle spot, but there's a whole lot of question marks up and down the offensive line. So it's not just left tackle, even though that's the most expensive question mark. It's not the only one.
Well, what about this, Glenn? What do you think? What do you think are now? We're not doctors, right? But like, what do you see? What's your confidence level in Ronnie coming back and playing like Ronnie or anything close to him?
Well, I think that my confidence level of him starting the year is pretty high because he's
played had so much time at this point.
Yeah, he played in really one game. So I think that he'll start the year. But my confidence level of him finishing the whole year is relatively low, Jimbo. He's done it once. I mean, it's hard to have a lot of confidence in a guy who just hasn't shown it consistently. So I'm hesitant to believe that. And I think that the Patrick McCary signing kind of shows that they understand that he's just one. And it's unfortunate because it's not like it's been issues where, it's because of lack of training or it's because of, this. He's always getting rolled up on, Jimbo. It's always some bad luck stuff for Ronnie Stanley. And he's had some very severe injuries, and they've all been a result of someone rolling up on the back of his leg, which you can't control. I mean, there's really nothing you can do to prepare for that. So that's disappointing. But my hope is that they can look, they got 9 picks in the first 4 rounds. I don't want to see them make all 9 of those picks, Jimbo. I want to see them use some of those picks to get a guy. But I'm so torn as to when you take a tackle because I look and I see we need pass rush. No doubt we need pass rush help with all the older guys that are moving on, with Bowser tearing his Achilles in the final game. and really only feeling really good about Odafe Owe. That's it. That's one guy out of a whole room and a
He's
whole
like that
position group.
GIF with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's in the room by himself, and he's just like,
yeah, looking around. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's completely alone out there. So I know that there's a bunch of other holes on this team, and there's still the chance, although I just said I'm not very high on it, there's still the chance that Ronnie could come back and play all year. And then if you take a pick high at offensive tackle, it could be end up on a wasted pick, at least for in the short term. So it's such a tough call. That Eric DeCosta, has a tough job for a lot of reasons. But man, I don't know what he's going to do to kind of fix the situation at left tackle.
yeah, it's going to be really interesting. If I had to bet, like I mentioned, I think that they do a little bit of both. But what I want to happen is to do their very best to now. Orlando was a unique situation by his terrible showing in the combine. We obviously see that he was
got a steal there.
Much more valuable than what did we get him in the third?
Mm-hmm.
Third, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but something of that magnitude, if we can catch something like that. If not, I'm okay with spending the first rounder on a tackle as long as we're convinced he can play right and he's not going to fuss.
So what about Juwan James? Is he more of a
then at that point
sugar on top or something, or
yeah,
cherry on top?
Well, you can do two things with him. Of course, he wouldn't be a very highly paid swing at that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you could use McCary and maybe answer one of those questions on the interior of the line, right?
Good point. Yeah.
What if Bradley leaves? Now, I know everyone doesn't love the idea of McCary at center, but what are your options if Brad leaves and we don't pick up a guy in the draft, right?
Yeah.
And or look, what if Cleveland doesn't develop, right? What you know what I mean? So you can swing him, you can put him at left guard. So point being, I hope that I'm okay and hope that they take a guy in the first round. And I also just want to say this, Glenn, to pat myself on the back.
Oh, don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, I know. But how many years now have I been saying we got to draft offensive linemen and early in the draft? We got, and I feel like it's kind of biting us in the butt at this point, right? Like we got to take them. We got to take them early. And Eric DeCosta was so fixated on not having the reporters ask about the wide receiver position that now reporters asking about the offensive line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. Let us know how you guys think the Ravens solve this problem through the draft, through free agency, internally. Is there a guy? Do they do a little bit of both? What do you do with Ronnie Stanley? Give us all your thoughts, comments.
Because you can't cut him, by the way. Don't tell me cut him, because that dead money is insane.
And don't say trade him either, guys. No one is
taking on that contract with that injury history. Can't do it.
Absolutely. So let us know what your thoughts are. Leave your comments below, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you.